Hi everybody, it's Brickwaffle again. Today it's time for Redstone 301, and today we're going to talk about memory circuits and pulse circuits. So if you remember from the previous videos, we've already talked about power and activation, we've talked about transmission. Links for those videos are in the description. If you're confused by some of this, I recommend you go check those out. But we're going to start today with memory circuits, and the most basic form of that is an RS latch. And what that looks like is just two inverters side by side, one of which is powered on, the other which is powered off due to inverting that torch. And when you press a button on one side, it toggles the state of this torch. When you press it on the other, it toggles it back. So this is a complicated way of using two buttons to act as a sort of lever. Now this can be useful if you want to have inputs from two different sides of a wall, for example, or on opposite sides of a mechanism. But otherwise, you'll see this circuit a lot, and now, hopefully, you'll recognize what that is when you see it in other redstone contraptions. This is a D-latch. A D-latch uses the special property of repeaters to lock their current input state, regardless of any further input received from the back end of it. So you can see that with this left circuit turned off, the lever here works as we would expect it to. It toggles the lamp on and off. But we can lock that lever so that it doesn't matter what you do on this side. We can unlock it, which will power it on, lock it again in the on condition, and now you can't toggle it off. So hopefully you'll see this circuit and you'll recognize that as well. Next up is the D flip-flop. And this works identically to the D-latch, with the exception of it is always locking one or the other bar. So there's never a point where this lever is active as a normal lever. It's either locked in one of those conditions, or if we power it on and then lock it again, it's locked on. So all that does is set the state of the switch for when you lock it. So now it'll go off, and then it'll stay off as long as you have this active. It'll be on, and that'll stay on for as long as you have this active. This is a big one, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. This is called a JK latch, and the purpose of this complicated circuit is that you can take inputs from multiple different areas, and you can turn this into either an R latch, an RS latch, a D latch, flip-flop. Basically, you can make this into any of the other gates you want to. In real life, that's convenient. You can mass produce these and use them in electronics wherever you like, and you don't have to produce individual components. As you can see in Minecraft, though, it's a lot more resource intensive to build, and it takes up a lot more space. Very, very, very few contraptions will actually ever use a JK latch. Lastly, for the memory circuits, we have the T flip-flop. This device is quite common, and you can see that it also uses the special property of repeaters here. But what this does is it turns a button into a toggle. So when you press it the first time, you'll see that it turns the lamp on and the lamp stays on. When you press it again, it turns the lamp off and stays off. Next, we're going to talk about pulse circuits. There are several kinds of pulse circuits, and all of these have to do with either producing, detecting, multiplying, dividing, something to do with pulses. In the first case, this is a simple pulse generator. When we press the button, we're going to get a single redstone tick pulse, and you can see that that lamp just barely turns on. Now this is also a rising edge detector, and what that means is at the beginning of a redstone pulse, you get that first tick, and then for the rest of the time this redstone dust is active, you can see that the redstone lamp is not on for as long as the redstone dust is activated. This dust is activated for the full 4 ticks. This lamp is only activated for the first one, hence the pulse generator. Next up is the pulse limiter. This takes a long pulse, maybe it's too long for the purposes of your circuit, and turns it into a short pulse. It uses the exact same concept, but you can see that while this redstone repeater stays on for quite a bit longer, that redstone lamp only stays on for just a moment. This is also a rising edge detector, and it's also similar to the pulse generator. The only difference is here, instead of just generating a single tick pulse, you could in theory lengthen it from 4 to 2 or 4 to 3 ticks. You can control exactly how much of a pulse length you want. Next is the pulse extender, and this turns a single pulse into a much longer pulse. So you can see we've got 2 redstone repeaters here set on a long delay, and when we press this button, that redstone lamp stays on for the length of both of these repeaters. It turns on instantly thanks to this redstone dust. And you can imagine that if you had several of these in parallel, you could keep the circuit on for quite a bit longer with just one button press. Next is the pulse multiplier, and this uses a property of clocks that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but this takes a single button press and turns it into multiple pulses outward. The important thing to note here is this comparator is in subtract mode, but when we press the button, you can see that it pulses several times before turning off again. Now you can use this to shoot several arrows from a dispenser, to have lights flicker as an alarm when you press a button, any sort of contraption you can think of where you would want several pulses for each input. This is the pulse divider. This takes a certain number of input pulses and only produces one output pulse based on how many input pulses you receive. In this case, there are 5 hoppers here and then a dropper, so every 5th pulse will emit one signal out through this comparator to power this block. The way you build this is you put all of these hoppers in a chain pointing into each other, pointing into this dropper, pointing back into the first hopper. Every time you press the button, it's going to temporarily activate those hoppers for 1 tick and allow the item to move. When it reaches the dropper, it's going to move in there and fire right off into the next hopper, and that will give you your 1 tick pulse at the end. So when you see press this once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and on the 5th one, we get 1 pulse. Now you can imagine if you had a clock that was very quick and you only wanted to produce an output off of every 5th one, this would be a great way to do that. And of course you can extend the length of hoppers here to extend the length of how many pulses you want to produce an output pulse. This circuit is a pulse length detector. It uses an AND gate that you might recognize from the previous video, and it checks to make sure that the signal input is longer than the redstone input, the redstone repeater input here. So in this case, if I just briefly step on the pressure plate and back off, you'll see that nothing happens. But if I stand on it long enough, it does light up the redstone lamp. Now obviously because these are using redstone repeaters, you can change the timing by changing the circuit here. If I make this very short, then it's possible to trigger that with a single step. And at some point I can decide exactly how long I want someone to stand on this pressure plate before they get a reaction from the output. And the last thing we're going to talk about in this episode is the simple clock. This is not quite the simplest clock you can build that runs indefinitely without any user input, but the nice thing about this version is that it is toggleable. So we saw the button clock earlier, where it produces multiple pulses for a single input. This will produce as many pulses as you want as long as the input is on. So in this case, you can see that that fires pretty quickly. And you can imagine if there was a dispenser full of arrows at the end of this, it would be firing those arrows very quickly at your enemies. Then you can turn this off again, and it stops. So this is a great way to have toggleable, infinite rapid pulses. You can use this in all sorts of designs, and you can change the length of those pulses by adjusting the redstone ticks here. So if we make this 4 each, you can see that that fires much, much, much more slowly. And if we set this back to 1 tick delays each, it fires very quickly. So you can control exactly how many pulses you get, how often, and you can turn the device on and off. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please do leave it a like. If you really enjoyed this, please subscribe, pass the word along to your friends. If you have any comments, anything you'd like to suggest, if you have links to other videos that you've done with different versions of these same circuits, absolutely leave me a video reply. I'd love to hear feedback from you guys. I really enjoy making these videos, and I hope you find them useful. As always, I've been Brickwaffle. Thank you for watching.